is correct. Question?
Okay, sorry.
Sure. So.
Okay, I don't have a microphone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to have a completely different conversation about ethics and sustainability, okay?
Great.
Okay, somebody said...
Can you use the mic, please?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Maybe just start over again.
Okay, I said I would like to have a completely different conversation about ethics and sustainability. And someone mentioned earlier that there's an overlap. You believe there's an overlap. I absolutely believe there's an overlap between ethics, compliance, and sustainability. And because of that, my question is going to go to how you manage a variety of issues from the sustainability standpoint, but taking into consideration the overlap with ethics and compliance, okay? So when you think, and there's so many issues that we could talk about, when you think about tank cars exploding as rail cars are transporting oil, when you think about the GM issues with safety and how it got down that slippery slope, and you tie that to profits, because at the end of the day, it's all about profitability. Because if it weren't, people would be taking care of these things. So from a sustainability standpoint, I'd like to hear from all of you as to what role you can play in having some kind of an impact on the political issues, the financial issues, the social issues. Because it all comes back to sustainability and ethics.
I don't know if this is a good answer, you'll let me know, but it seems to me that the role of business in society has changed, and often business is filling a gap that government isn't filling. And I'm not sure if that's a good angle, but let me give you one of the areas that I'm responsible for is security and human rights, which is a big deal in our industry, particularly ex-US. And I think you have a speaker this afternoon, Christine Bader, who was integral to developing the UN principles on business and human rights, and the guiding principles being the state's duty is to protect human rights, but the enterprise's duty is to respect, and people who feel like their rights have been violated need to have remedy, access to remedy. And that works really well in principle, except where the state can't or won't fulfill its duty to protect citizens' human rights. They either don't have the right robust rule of law, the legal system simply isn't established in a way that does that, the security forces, whether they be police or military, are not trained in terms of what it means to engage with the community in a way that's respectful of their human rights and protects them. And I think we talked about this in the prep for this panel, but I was about 6 months ago at a meeting to kind of further this discussion under the auspices of the UN. And it became clear to me that both civil society and governments, both developing world governments and governments that provide a fair amount of bilateral funding, are extremely frustrated by the inability of government to play what is, I think, a central role in this kind of tripartite pillar of human rights. And the immediate instinct was to turn and go, business, you're the problem, right? You're the ones out there, your operations are violating human rights, so we're going to police you, as opposed to figure out how can we build the capacity of host governments to really do what needs to be done to protect human rights. Much easier because we're publicly traded to point fingers and say, okay, we're, our government, although we have funding for developing world government capacity building, is going to focus on regulation or oversight of businesses that are incorporated in our country, as opposed to doing that and helping build capacity in developing countries. So I think it's really frustrating. So when you ask how do we get engaged on these issues, it's very difficult. I mean, you look at energy policy, which is something I think our industry should and tries to engage in to varying levels of success, quite frankly. But the reality is 40-some years ago in this country, we had serious gasoline shortages. Some of you probably remember standing on line, alternate days where you could fill up. 40 years, and this country has no long-term energy policy. I find that incredible. And then, you know, we're panicking because there's climate change, and there is, and it's a big problem. And now everyone's panicking that we need a policy, we need to get rid of fossil fuels, but we don't have an infrastructure that can get rid of fossil fuels tomorrow. So, you know, business, you know, is often drawn into things because quite frankly, government and civil society have not been able to necessarily fill their roles.